Hello everyone. I just wanted to touch on a few things that we'd covered the last few weeks. I feel like I've been throwing quite a lot of things at you, and I wondered if it'd be easier to kind of chunk things down, to use Mary's terminology from teaching. And yeah, I wanted to touch on three things. I wanted to look at the plan of the painting. I wanted to look at the choice of colour, and I wanted to look at the brush technique. So last week we looked at brush technique, basically how you apply the paint. Today we looked at colour groupings, and previously we looked at planning a painting. So we gridded up a drawing. This has become slightly less relevant because people are working with things that are like landscape, so things that are a wee bit more forgiving, things that are slightly less complicated, where the positioning is maybe not as pertinent. Okay, I'll still do a wee bit of it, but it won't be as complicated as we did a number of weeks ago when we did that drawing with the cup and the jug. Okay. A useful but not essential part of planning a painting can be putting down a colour first of all. This can be a wash, it can be nice and thin, just to warm up the white of the paper or the boards, or it can be something quite a bit more solid. So this was a piece we worked on a number of weeks ago, possibly even a year ago or more, onions. And this is where there's been a solid hit of black down first of all. What's happened here is that it's allowed the purples and all the other colours to become much more luminous. Okay, the one underneath, by comparison, is a landscape. It doesn't seem to make a lot of logical sense to paint a red down, but given there was a lot of green going down afterwards, you can see here, although it's kind of quite extreme and quite punchy, that the red has given the green something to fight against, okay? And it's made this blue grey at the top a lot more interesting as well, okay? So we're going to touch on in the video this idea of putting a colour down first of all, and hopefully over the last 2 weeks you will have got a much better sense as to what that colour is going to be in the coming weeks. Alright, just a quick note on layering. I've put down two squares, one of a magenta and one of a burnt green earth. Okay, just really want to highlight the idea of order, okay, and how the colour that you put down first affects what's going to go down afterwards. Alright, so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to reverse the colours. Okay, so going down just now is some of the green on top of the magenta. Get a reasonably even coverage here just so that I can highlight the small things like how luminous this looks at the back here, but also crucially as I kind of scratch back into it, just how kind of charming those marks are. Alright, so next up, the magenta on top of the green earth. So you can see that I'm having to go quite thick with this this paint on top. Alright, when I scrape it away, it's not doing much. I'm having to go really pretty thick on top for it to register. Okay, so that's something worth bearing in mind as you move forward. So I've selected a fairly simple image to work from. This is a photograph I've just had kicking around, and I wanted something with fairly limited colours. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to map out the image. Now I think it's worth noting that the image is not quite square, but it's certainly not a long kind of like cinema screen type proportion. Okay, so here's the image I'm going to be working from. I wanted something fairly simple and something that had a fairly limited palette of colours. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to translate the proportions down. This image is not quite square, okay, it's clearly a rectangle. That's very important when we start to translate this down. Okay, so I've translated a rectangle down, I've corrected it slightly, so please ignore this section. And what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to make a line kind of top and bottom, and this will, you don't have to do this, I'm just doing this with speed. A ruler obviously would be more preferable. Okay, so I now have reference points, so I've kind of broken it down into 4 sections. So I'm going to sketch this out, and then I'm going to... So starting to make a few marks in relation to this idea that I've got a line horizontal and vertical. And I can see that this kind of just crosses the halfway line, so I can see that this pink sweep kind of starts here and then it comes up way past the halfway line. And this is just giving me some indication as to how I can plan out my composition. Okay. Alright, nearly there for the sketch. My benchmark for this sort of thing is always, can you pass this on to someone else and they can make a bit of sense of it. Alright, so there is the original, and there's an incredibly quick sketch. So, colour choice. I'm going to give this a hit of a sort of thin wash of magenta, so the one I was using earlier. And this is going to serve a bit of a purpose because the darker tones under here are going to be cemented by the first layer that I put down now. Hopefully it will make the darks quite a bit more interesting, and when I put the blue down lastly, it will make that more interesting also. So I'm just going to talk you through what is out of shot. You can see the image, you can see some brushes. I put out a big sheet of greaseproof here. I think this is something that we've not talked about for the last wee while, and it's this idea that you have all your colours to hand, okay, all of them. You're not squeezing out things as you need them, you have them there and ready to go. Okay, so over here we've got some ultramarine blue, some titanium white, some yellow, some Payne's grey, and the magenta that I used previously. Okay, so one pre-mixed dark, some white obviously, and then one of each of the primaries. So first thing, I'm just going to use some of the Payne's grey, and I'm going to put down the darker parts of the painting really quickly. So I'm not entirely satisfied that the wash that I've put down is going to be dark enough for the darkest bit of the pink sweet. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take some of the magenta and I'm just going to add a wee bit of the ultramarine blue. And that will give me a slightly more purpley tone on which to work on top of. So I've been talking to a few people about the idea of this part of the painting being like scaffolding, where you're doing quite a lot of work that's fairly unglamorous. And yeah, it's you're working with colours that are maybe not desperately attractive. Okay, so right now, and because of the lights, that doesn't look great, but that is the yellow mixed with a tiny amount of the Payne's grey just to knock it back a wee bit. And secondly, once that's dry, I'm going to go in with the neat yellow across here to pick out that highlight. So next up, I've taken some of the white and a bit of the Payne's grey, and what I want to do is just give this section of the painting here a bit of a hit, and this will allow later on, when I go back in with the neat white, it'll have something to sit on. Okay, so that is in fact just a rather pale grey. The section in the middle has become a bit kind of glaringly obvious, so I've got a thin wash of Payne's Grey and I'm just going to put in a little shadow in there just now. So next up, I'm just going to scratch in some highlights on the black bit of licorice at the bottom. These are incredibly sparse, so I'm going to use a fairly dry brush. So same mix as here, just a teeny wee bit more Payne's Grey, and yeah, I really don't want much paint going down at all. So the plan now is to work on these sections here. So the sort of dark wall of this suite, the sort of light pink top, and this streak of yellow here, and potentially some lighter white here. All right. Just want to take you over here a second, just to kind of keep you in a loop as to what's happening. So again, just sticking with this kind of 5-colour approach, and I've got some magenta here, and all I'm going to do is mix up a couple of variations of the pink. Okay, so one quite light and then another with just a smidge of white through it. So I've been quite generous with the amount of paint that I've mixed up here, okay, and all I'm going to do here is sort of scratch in a fairly sort of thick mix of this lighter pink. Okay, now I've been omitting the odd little bit to get the sort of cragginess that's happening over here. So next up, the top section where I'm kind of working in a significantly lighter pink just to show the highlight. And just to tie it in, I'm going to work in a few sort of quite sparse kind of highlights around here. So next up, big generous dose of the yellow, just so that can sit nice and thick on that section there as a highlight. And much the same thing, but this time with neat white. Not something I would do very often, but I think it kind of calls for it, just to kind of really make that top side kind of sing. So really only one thing left to do, and that is to block in the background. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to scoop up all of the ultramarine I've put out. I put a bit of the modelling paste that I talked about quite a lot. I'm going to see just how much that lightens it before I add any white. Okay, I'm being incredibly generous with the amount of paint here, simply because coverage is a very important part of this next step. Alright, I don't imagine many of you with the, sorry, I'll get the camera on the actual paint, that would help. I don't imagine many of you will be doing a lot of cutting in if you're working on a landscape, but certainly this is something that is pretty useful for this type of painting. And yeah, it's amazing sort of just when you reverse things and sort of you start looking at the background going down last rather than first. Alright. So for the most part I've been using a round brush. I'm now going to switch to a flat brush, and this is just going to go round the rest of the objects. Okay, so here we go, last section. I'm going to start cutting in with this nice thick blue. Now, at this stage, I feel there's too much distance between the black and the top of that object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut right in. All right, this is the kind of the beauty of this technique, where I can really redefine that edge. All right, you'll see also that I'm not absolutely obliterating what's happening underneath, because I think there's something nice about those two colours coming together. So last section. So very nearly done. I'm not convinced that this section in here is nearly dark enough, so I've just added a bit of Payne's grey to the blue, and I'm just going to scratch in a little shadow just to kind of echo that one there and that one there. So there we go. Pretty hasty, pretty scratchy, but hopefully bringing together a number of the elements that we've looked at. So this idea of planning, okay, so I just made a sort of simple cross in the middle to break it down into kind of 4 sections. I then gave it a wash just to give something going on underneath, and you can still see the value of that kind of even kind of areas like here and down here, okay. I then started working on the darker sections. So I worked with a Payne's grey and planned out kind of here, here and here. And then kind of blocked in areas using really quite unglamorous colours, but you know, a sort of purple, a yellow mixed with a Payne's grey. And then that allowed me to build these lighter colours on top, okay, and it gives them something much heavier to sit on top, and they have a lot more impact because of that. So just to sum up, we looked at 3 things. We looked at this idea of planning. So we looked at the idea of kind of making a square and then just dividing it up. We then looked at kind of putting a hit of colour down to work on top of. We looked at narrowing down the colours to just 3 plus a dark plus a light. Then we looked at the application of the paint. I didn't discuss the application of the paint too much there. Hopefully all the good practice that you've done so far will have built up into something that feels that a wee bit more instinctive, a bit more like muscle memory, and hopefully the work we've done over the last couple of weeks will kind of be a really good grounding there. But certainly this idea of narrowing your colour scheme to just a few paints plus maybe 1 dark, 1 light. The planning, which hopefully won't be that difficult, certainly looking at the images that we're working with, sort of things that are that bit more organic. So planning, colour scheme and brush technique hopefully will come together, and we'll make some really nice paintings next week. Thank you.